Welcome to the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode explores a new topic with a guest who brings their unique experience and knowledge. Tune in and discover something new each time you listen.
Hello and welcome to Bank Talk. I'm Jordan Kelly, your host and consultant at Remedy Consulting. Today we're talking about cannabis banking, the ins and outs, the what you need to knows as a community financial institution, and a high-level state of the industry for cannabis bankers. I'm sitting down with Kristen Stowe, who is the Director of Cannabis Sales at Credit Union One. She has over 8 years of experience in leading cannabis programs. So with that, let's dive into our discussion. Hi, Kristen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Kristen, you and I were able to catch up a little bit before we jumped on to record this morning, but give me a little bit of your background. Just introduce yourself for some of our listeners.
Certainly. My name is Kristen Stowe, and I am the Director of Cannabis Sales for Credit Union One. I've been in the cannabis banking space since about 2018 when Credit Union One launched their cannabis banking program. Prior to that, my background is in commercial banking, retail banking operations. I've worked throughout a few different states and mostly on the retail side of banking operations until Credit Union One entered this space. And I have a passion for the plant and the industry, so I knew that I wanted to be involved, and that was kind of the beginning of my story in cannabis.
That's so interesting. It's great that you've been involved since Credit Union One got into this space because I wanted to ask, how did Credit Union One get into cannabis banking? Kind of what's the story there?
Cannabis banking has always been a gap in the financial institution services realm. The cannabis industry is faced with so many obstacles on obtaining banking services, traditional banking services that any other type of commercial business would be able to go and obtain. And Credit Union One saw that. We saw a gap in that industry. We saw a large industry of operators that didn't have traditional banking services that they need to be able to operate on a day-to-day basis. And most people know that a credit union's motto is to serve the underserved, and we recognize that they were a very underserved market. We originally started in Illinois, where we are headquartered, and then we also had a large presence in Nevada, which were two of the largest cannabis markets in the nation at the time. And so we decided that we wanted to step into this space to be able to provide compliant banking services for operators that were struggling to find that anywhere else.
It's understandable. As I was doing a little bit of research when you and I started talking about this, it makes sense that there's such a high need for this kind of niche industry. So can you tell me, we'll go into this a little bit more later, but at a high level, does Credit Union One, would you consider this a growth area for the credit union?
Absolutely. It was an opportunity for us to not only serve an underserved market, but from the lens of a financial institution, we were able to open up a new line of business with large deposit potential out there. Because there were so few operators in the space like we were, we had an opportunity to kind of go out and grab a large market share of the deposits that were out there. So they go hand in hand. We were able to serve the operators like we wanted to for our ethos, but also expand a line of business for us that had potential for a new revenue stream.
So tell me a little bit more. You mentioned that this was certainly an underserved market, but give me really the credit union perspective. I mean, just help me understand it a little bit. What are some of the main differences between banking services in general for a small business or a typical commercial business versus a cannabis business?
Certainly, and there are a lot of similarities and there are a lot of differences. The primary difference that we run into is the compliance factor. There are a tremendous amount of federal regulations, state regulations, FinCEN guidance that we have to abide by in order to be compliant with our program, and that trickles down to our operators. So In order for us to be compliant in this space, we have to do enhanced due diligence on all of our applicants before they're able to onboard. We're having to do ongoing monitoring for their account activity, cash deposits, what types of vendors they're paying and receiving payments from. They're limited on the types of services that they're allowed to use based on a lot of the restrictions that we have placed on us from a federal standpoint. So, where a typical commercial business would be able to walk into any given bank or credit union and say, "Hey, I'd like to open up a bank account for my bakery or my auto body shop." And they would probably, if they had all of their paperwork in order, be able to open that account on the spot. Versus us, there's so much extra due diligence that we have to do on the back end to approve an account before we're able to onboard. That process can take couple of weeks, sometimes longer, depending on the complexity of the organization and the entity structure. And then it does require a lot more overhead from us on a resource standpoint because of the enhanced due diligence that we have to have. So we had to consider expanding our compliance team to allow for additional analysts to review these transactions on a daily basis. We had to expand our sales team to be able to understand the very specific niche requirements and needs of our operators in the cannabis space. Even our service team is more equipped on some specifics on how to support these members that a traditional bank account, a non-cannabis account would require. So it's lots and lots of complexities compared to what a traditional business would have to encounter.
So you know what? I'm putting on my credit union hat for a moment. And this is
Mhm.
what I kind of heard from you was that there's a lot more upfront work. There's a lot more overhead, really kind of for the life of this relationship, which in theory would be ongoing for forever. So this is just to sate my own curiosity is there a difference in kind of how you charge or work with a cannabis business because they do require so much more overhead than a typical commercial business, even if they were ultimately kind of using the same services from your credit union?
Absolutely, there is. We have to charge a higher fee for those services because of that additional overhead. Not only is it labor hours that go into it, but we also have to have a robust compliance platform that we utilize. And there are a few providers out there, but all of them come at a cost. So, in addition to just offering traditional deposit services and online banking services like we would to a non cannabis member, we also have to utilize those additional pieces that add additional cost. So we have to factor that into it and that definitely is part of the decision-making process that we had when coming into this space. But for us, it outweighed the cost, all of the overhead, all of the labor hours, all of the resources that we had to put into this program. We did so knowing that we were going to be making a difference for an industry that was in desperate need of a partner.
It's interesting. It's just a really good perspective to get because from what I've seen, I think that cannabis banking tends to be one of those hot topics. Now, of course, bigger need in certain states than in others, but it does tend to be a hot topic. However, there's always this concern from the credit union or the banker side of what does it truly take to get this stood up internally and is it worth it in the long term? Because it does require so much more ongoing support. So I think that's just a really good perspective to get.
Yeah, I think that for us at Credit Union One, it was a no-brainer for us, but it's certainly not the broad opinion of a lot of financial institutions. For someone trying to make that decision, there are a lot of different decisions or a lot of different factors that go into that decision. Are you capable of doing a long-term strategy? Unfortunately, we've been in the game since 2018. We were one of the original credit unions or financial institutions in the space. And so we've seen a lot of operators come and go. And unfortunately, the ones that have made a big impact negatively, a negative impact on our members that come aboard are ones where they've been in a program. The program had great pricing, they had great products, they had great service, but maybe they just weren't equipped for the long haul for a lot of different reasons. Maybe it's portfolio diversity, maybe ratios, things like that. Maybe it is the cost of running the program and profitability profitability spreads aren't what they need to be. There are a lot of different factors, but they close their programs. And then that's left these members with a need. I've got to scramble and go find another relationship somewhere. And like I mentioned, sometimes it can take weeks or a month to get onboarded, depending on the complexity and timeliness of the application. And so you can imagine trying to run a business, even a traditional business, having to go find a new bank account in less than 30 days would be a hassle. And then to know that you're having to do it with all these additional complexities, it just creates a nightmare for the members. And so it's important, I think, for anybody considering a cannabis program for their financial institution to really consider their long-term strategies and capacity. Otherwise, they might be doing a disservice, even if their program looks good up front initially.
I think that's really good advice. Nothing necessarily groundbreaking there in terms of, if you're going to start if you're going to try to get into a new area, yes, of course there needs to be strong strategy and strong planning up front, but it is really kind of taking those other pieces into consideration. To me, it sounds like what you really need is, do you have the amount of people and the correct talent in order to make this successful for your members long term, not just in that initial setup.
Exactly that. And I think it's also important for those folks to have a passion for this space. I think that makes a big difference because if you go into it solely looking for an additional line of business to increase profitability or grow deposits, things like that, then you're really missing out on the ethos of the industry. And I think that's going to create some struggles down the line as well. If you don't have a passion for the industry and what they're doing and what they're trying to create, then it's hard to become a true partner in that space and try to find solutions that are relevant to what they're experiencing that are completely different from what a non-cannabis business is experiencing. So not only does it take the resources, but I think it also takes a mindset and a passion for the space to want to be there and operate there.
We'll be right back.
Ever feel like your tech budget's running the show instead of supporting it? You're not alone. Between bloated vendor contracts and outdated systems, a lot of banks are stuck paying more for less. And here's the kicker. Those big tech vendors, their contracts are built to protect them, not you. So if you're hesitating to make bold moves because of tech costs, it's time to flip the script. That's where Remedy Consulting comes in. We help banks take back control, cutting through the fine print, optimizing spend, and finding tech solutions that actually fuel growth. And we're offering a free review of your tech stack, spending, and vendor contracts. No pressure, no sales pitch, just expert insight to help you make smarter decisions. Even if we're not the right fit, you'll walk away with clarity and confidence. So go to remedyconsult.net or call 206-295-5776. Let's make your tech work for you, not against you. Thanks for listening to the BankTalk podcast.
That makes sense. I was reading through some notes as you were chatting, and I realized I feel like I missed something that's kind of key to this type of relationship that you were talking about. So now, please correct me if I'm wrong. At this point in time, are all cannabis-related businesses, are they cash only?
They are not anymore. They used to be
Okay.
very heavily prevalent in cash only. Fortunately for us and for a lot of our members, we have found some solutions that provide traditional banking services in the treasury management sphere for them. For instance, we now offer ACH and wire services, online banking and bill pay, remote deposit capture where they can scan their checks from their desk at the office and send them in for deposits. We also have the ability for our members to have their cash picked up by a courier, and depending on some additional services that they can absorb, they can actually get advanced credit of those cash deposits through a smart safe that's in their facility to where they get earlier credit, which helps to maximize their cash flow. So while the consumer is typically at the retail dispensary level is still paying cash only or using some workarounds like cashless ATMs and things like that, and that's a whole nother story for a whole different session. I don't want us to get sidetracked there. But the consumer is paying cash, and then the retails have to figure out what to do with that. But once they get it into the bank account through a courier service, then they're able to utilize those electronic services to pay their taxes through a wire if they need to. So there is that popular misconception that it's still cash only. And technically, the cash is coming in from the consumer side of it, yes. But once it's in the system, we're able to provide a lot of different services that weren't there in the past.
That is really illuminating. And for me personally, but also just I think that that's something that's good to know. Like you said, it's probably a pretty popular misconception and likely driven by the fact that particularly don't have a lot of experience in the cannabis banking space, then if you've only ever seen the retail side of cannabis sales,
Right.
realistically, the only experience you might have is as a cash only business. So
Exactly.
really kind of getting that perspective of, all of those different solutions that you guys help put in place for those businesses to really get their dollars from cash and into the bank. That's a really interesting story to hear.
And it goes hand in hand with what I was talking about as far as finding solutions specific to this industry. And while ACH and wire services, bill pay, and things like that are not novel in any way, they're traditional services offered by pretty much any financial institution out there. It's not necessarily traditional for us to be able to offer those to the cannabis space because of the additional due diligence that it requires from us on the back end from a compliance perspective. So a lot of financial institutions aren't willing or capable of having those services. And so we were able to step in and say, hey, this is a very unique need of our cannabis operators, and how can we solve for this specific to what they need? So that's the mindset that you have to go into when you're creating and growing and sustaining a cannabis banking program.
That makes sense. And I was even, as you were talking, I was thinking back to what you said earlier about how, if I'm a financial institution leader, if this is something I'm considering, really that extra piece of having the passion in order to serve the industry, everything you just said really made me feel like you got to have that in order to want to go out and solve these types of problems for such a niche area.
For sure. Most of our operators are being oppressed with the 280E tax code, and that is creating a much higher taxable income for them, and they're paying a much higher tax rate than a non-cannabis business. And so having those cash flow management pieces in place are going to help them maximize every dollar as it comes in and out of their account. And that is pivotal for their success. They're running so lean these days because of lots of different things that are sales trends and market trends and just lots of things that are impacting the way that they have to operate. So it's important for us to know that we're offering solutions that are not just making their day-to-day operations more convenient, but helping them be more successful for their cash flow management. And hopefully that's helping them in a growth mentality for their own business as well.
Kristen, let me ask you before we, run out of time, let me ask you a very high level question about a little bit of state of the industry. So I was recently reading a forecast, and what it was saying is that US cannabis retail sales are forecasted to triple to nearly 81 billion by 2035, and that the potential interest revenue from financial institution loans could grow to 2.4 billion in the next decade. So, I mean, to me, that really sounds like, from my outside perspective, it spells an opportunity for financial institutions. But you are really in the weeds of this. So, are you seeing the same thing? Or, as you were just saying, as some of your operators, some of your businesses are running a little bit leaner these days, are you seeing different trends?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right about the maturity of those loans coming up, and it's been a conversation that I've heard in a lot of different rooms in the industry lately. I think the next 12 to 24 months are going to be less about a boom and more about a reset, but it's going to be an uneven one. Unfortunately, a lot of cannabis operators are coming up on maturing private debt that was taken on at really high rates because at the time that was the only capital available. So naturally, people assume financial institutions are just going to step in and replace that debt. The reality is, though, most won't, at least not broadly. Even strong operators are still constrained by 280E, which impacts cash flow in a very real way. And most financial institutions have a pretty narrow credit box when it comes to cannabis. So you've got this disconnect where there's viable businesses, but they don't cleanly fit traditional underwriting models or internal risk appetites. So what I expect to see is kind of a gap. Not everyone is going to be able to refinance, and not every financial institution is going to step in and fill that need. That means we'll see a continued pressure, restructures, and some level of consolidation across the industry, most likely. But I don't think that eliminates the opportunity. I think it just reshapes it. Instead of jumping straight into lending, I think the smarter play for financial institutions is to build their relationship first. Bring in operators into a transparent banking environment, support their cash management, and really understand how their business performs, even with 280E in play. Because over time, that data and that relationship can open the door to more thoughtful, lower risk credit solutions, even if they're more limited or structured differently than other traditional types of loans. So, my prediction is that we're not going to see a flood of institutional lending replace private debt overnight. We're going to see a slower transition where probably the strongest operators find partners who are willing to move deliberately with them. And the institutions that are honest about their risk appetite and build from deposits to credit over time, I think those are the ones that are actually going to come out ahead. So, this isn't really like a capital replacement story. I think it's more of a capital evolution story, and it's going to take some time.
That's interesting. That's a really good kind of perspective on it because from what I've seen, there is so much fluctuation, I think, in this area, in this industry, and really being able to hear from somebody who you've been doing this for 8 years. So,
Mhm.
for example, if there's a financial institution leader out there who's studying the cannabis industry or considering this as a line of business, really it sounded like your key piece of advice to some of those leaders would be start with deposits, growing the relationship, and consider credit as a future down the line potential, but not a day one plan.
Yeah, I would agree. And if lending is absolutely necessary right now, so many operators need it. And any institution that's able to step into that space with a lending component is going to thrive. But it's important that they do so in a responsible way for our industry and it's not more predatory loans that are in double digit rates and structured poorly that are a little bit predatory. And so going into it with the right mindset and the right program is going to be important, I think, for fairness and to help propel the industry instead of just continuing to create barriers.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that. So I know we're getting a little bit of close to time here. So I wanted to just last question, last ask. Any last thoughts or pieces of advice for anybody who's either maybe they're just starting out or they're thinking about this as part of their strat plan for the future? Any additional thoughts there?
Yes, I think it's going to be important for us to see what the congressional hearing, what happens with the congressional hearing in July for rescheduling, because we're seeing some conversation about how rescheduling of medicinal cannabis has potential changes for tax codes and regulatory reporting and things like that. So, depending on what happens with that hearing, it could have a big impact on the compliance structures required and tax codes that are applying, which could help these operators evolve into a more lendable category. So I think that all eyes should be on the horizon for what happens in July or months thereafter, because it's not going to be a short process. And absolutely let that be a weighted factor into the decision making process about whether or not they want to sustain this program or start a new program, because that's going to be a big factor.
Thank you for that. I know we steered a little bit away from the regulatory side of this today, mostly because that could be 2 hours on its own. Sure.
We don't have the time for that, Jordan.
I have the time and I have the interest, but I want to, I wanted to keep us a little focused on what are some of the high level, what's good to know about cannabis banking. And I do appreciate your perspective on all of this, Kristen, because I think that this has been a lot of good information for some of our listeners.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I'm passionate about the space and I'm passionate about my operators. And at the end of the day, if we can get more financial institutions to provide great services for these businesses, that's my goal. I hope that it's Credit Union One, but if it's not us, I hope it's someone.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time today, Kristen. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I appreciate it.
That's it for Bank Talk. Thank you for listening. Have a good day and keep on learning.
Thank you for listening to the Bank Talk podcast brought to you by Remedy Consulting. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and share our work with others. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.